Order, we do have Randy online, so we're at,
What?
roll call. Got four of us recorded.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so first up is public comments.
We have no one, online requesting to make public comment, so.
Public comment.
We'll make an update. So this is Tori from Signature Flight Support for everybody on the line. We're working on a remodel to our FBO right now. We started December 1st. We are looking to finish by June 1st. I think it might go a little bit longer than that, just with some of the supply issues with some of the construction materials, which is kind of what everybody's seeing across the board. I know Paul had asked about, the restaurant. There's, some discussions about that. The remodel that we're doing is specifically for the FBO. It doesn't pertain to the restaurant. But the whole FBO, pretty much everything on the first floor. So it should be quite an improvement over what we've seen in the past. It's a little dated, so we're certainly very excited about it, and just working within our temporary space right now, which has been a little bit of a challenge, but that was to be expected. So yeah, hopefully sometime this summer we'll have some new space.
Awesome. Thanks, Tori.
Any other public comment in here? Any others online?
Still online.
All right, we'll move on. Past public comment going once, twice, sold. All right, first up is approval of minutes. You all should have gotten that in your email. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? Clarifications? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries. Business items, runway 321 study update.
Okay. Next slide. So if you recall, this board looked, I think it's about 8 months ago. We kind of took 3 months to do it, to come up with a recommendation. We took that recommendation from the advisory board, hired Wolpert to kind of deep dive it, do more of a feasibility study and a financial study of it. That talks about funding sources, availability, existing airport planning context, existing airport operators and users, air traffic control and previous user surveys, and establish a challenge statement and perform alternative analysis, and then ultimately provide recommendations. That report will be coming to the airport staff in March. We'll take a look at it. Probably we'll send to the, as a, just comments. We'll send it back to the consultants, and then they'll come up, and then at the same time, I'll brief the commissioners, let them add comments. Because when we get the final report, I want to have all those comments and information included in that report. Looking for kind of a April timeframe to brief the commissioners, brief the board, and get that report out, see what those recommendations are. But pretty exciting to have that right around the corner.
Yeah, nice.
Next slide.
Quick.
So if you recall last month's meeting, we started talking about Southside development and some of the, costs and how much land is available. One of the things we have to address, and we kind of talked with Jansen and Phil, Ben and I, about the must-haves on the south side. So we could, oh, by the way, I had a meeting today, and unless they change it after I got off the meeting, Ben, Sims Road is getting, so that is a huge undertaking that took years and years and years of getting that pushed forward. And then right behind that, the design of the taxiway Otis, which is the one that will then go across Old Sims into the new aviation, has been funded by the FAA. Great news. That's a first step. When they don't pay money unless they pretty sure they're going to fund it. So that actually will then be built in 2024. Once that happens, the economy tanks, things like that, and we're not as strong as we are. We can kind of pick and choose our development. That's kind of what I want the board to kind of look at, what makes the most sense. And, whether we build T hangars, box hangars, huge corporate hangars, whether we build all of it, whether we take a little bit of it. But one of the requirements that we have to do continue to develop the north side is to move hangars into porta ports. And so Ben did, some Google Earth work, and we have 117 county-owned T hangars, which takes up approximately 8.6 acres. We have 61 porta ports, which take up approximately 5.5 acres. So just over 14 acres on the north side needs to be allocated on the south side. Not all of that. Well, that's a discussion we'll have, to allow more appropriate development on the north side. So again, if you recall, we have our smallest individual GA hangars right next to our main heavy-duty runway. That's not how it should be. So we're gonna redevelop that area over to the south side. Next slide. So if you look at our, from our strategic business plan, that section we had set aside perfectly. Ben and I are so smart, but that's 16 acres basically set aside for GA. So that actually allows us for a little more expansion than just the 14.2 acres of porta ports and T hangars. So that's right there along taxiway Otis, perfect spot for where they belong, and gives us another almost 2.5 acres or so to build even more hangars if we decide that's the appropriate thing to do is. Next slide, Ben. Just some food for thought. Our GA hangar revenue. So on those county-owned T hangars, the revenue per square foot is about $1.29. That revenue for the porta port per square foot is 48 cents. Now, we started 3, maybe even 4 years ago now, getting those porta ports and T hangars aligned with our actual sort of ground cost. So our per square foot on most of our leases is about 65 to 70 or 69 cents a square foot. So you can see we're still behind on the porta ports since they own those hangars. And then the T hangars, I think you described it as a public good, kind of a community service to maintain our GA. But that's a little bit below what I would say is market value. But again, it provides a service to the airport. So as we're moving forward, and what you see, some other, ground lease rates are about 47 cents. But as we're moving forward, you kind of look at that and go, well, that's kind of our rate of return if we were to build these very similar type buildings. Next slide. So we have contracts with almost everybody on this airport. Contracts or leases, same thing. The county-owned T hangars are 30 days, of which I can cancel at any point with a 30-day written notice. The interesting thing is we don't necessarily have to replace those. So if the advisory board comes back and says, we really need to focus on more corporate or something else, there's no requirement to replace those. We do reserve the right to change the hangars. They can move from one to the other. So if we tore those down, we couldn't, simply take that tenant and give them a new one. It would have to go to the bottom of our waiting list, stuff like that. But to move in, they'd have 30 days to comply. So county-owned T hangars and marine parlance, very simple. 30-day notice, I can replace them or I can't. That's very simple planning for the people of the advisory board. Next slide. The porta ports are slightly different. They're also on a 30-day, month-to-month lease that I can cancel within writing in 30 days. It's important that anyone who is in a porta port understands that the premises are leased in as-in condition and no additional improvements or foundations will be added by the lessor. We know, because we've seen them, and I don't know how many, but there's a significant amount of people who have put in like 4 inches of concrete in the bottom of their hangar to keep the water out.
Yes.
4 inches of asphalt. They've done different things. So the decision we'll have to talk about is when they come time to move is by the contract, they'll have to replace that, put it back to pre-existing condition, which may not make sense because if we're redeveloping it with corporate hangars, they're going to bulldoze anything over. But I also am not a person who says, well, you violated the lease. you get to get a free ride and we have to, tear up your concrete. So I think that's something we need to talk about of what that would cost and maybe charge that into a prorated fee for those people who have done that if they move to a new hangar. Again, not the simplest thing to talk about. I suppose we could be nice and just say, hey, just move your hangar and we're good.
Just the question I would have that comes immediately to mind is, what about someone who's purchased a port relatively recently that a previous owner or 2 owners back or 10 owners back may have done that, without knowledge that maybe that should be.
They sign the lease. And I mean, and that's the problem. Here's the other one. I've been saying since the day I got here that we were going to move those ports.
Right.
And I told people, if you remember last meeting, I told Daryl when he asked, I said, look, I was telling you from day one, it was gonna be between 5 and 10 years. We're still 2 years out because Sims has gotta be moved, the taxiway's gotta go in, then the, infrastructure needs to go in. So we're probably right at 8 years, we'll be moving those. But they signed the lease, it says right in there that that's the way it is. So they're,
Yeah, by law, they.
read the small print, I guess, is what the thing. And again, and I think that's where we kind of have that discussion when, as we get closer to that, what do we do with those people? If it's gonna be redeveloped anyway, is there an additional
Yeah.
cost to
Right.
dig up concrete or asphalt?
The only thing I would, if I were reading that lease, I would say premises leased and as, the ground is leased and as is, and you can't add anything to it. A current owner might say, I didn't add anything to it. You leased me ground that had already been modified, and I haven't changed it from the way you leased it to me. So anyway, I just think it's something that we ought to have on the table and make sure that enters into the discussion as we.
I think the issue would become proving that, right? Because none of these people come and get a permit or permission
Right.
from the airport.
Absolutely.
They do it in the early mornings, and they're not sneaking around. I'm not saying they are, but they're not getting permitted to do it. So
Right.
it would be very hard for us to determine when those foundations went in.
But if a guy had a picture of his proud new purchase of his port that had concrete at the bottom of it, that might be
Might be good.
compelling, right?
The thing is that typically by law, you can't third party in, the airport was not part of your purchase of the hangar, so to say.
Right.
So you can't create a third party to a contract that didn't exist in the contract. So if you wanted to go back and sue that person who sold it to you, the law would say you can do that, but the airport would be, we're out of this.
Yeah.
Go sue them. You don't like it, sue them.
Yeah.
You're with us on this property. This is how it works here.
Yeah. John, that's actually what I wanted to say.
That's why we have smart people here.
But Joe was very quiet last month, so I wanted him to
It's basically warmed up
Yeah.
early.
Yeah, I'm not saying we should necessarily do anything or anything like that. I just think we should keep in mind as we enter into this, what's gonna be, at some point traumatic for at least some people.
Yeah.
That we keep in mind some of these issues, and that particularly if they're gonna be moved and development's gonna happen and the ground's gonna all be moved anyway, that maybe, and anyway, we just make sure we keep that on.
Yeah, and that's
Keep
kind of what
that
I,
in mind as part of the deal.
the letter of the law and then common sense, I think you look at and go,
Yeah.
we're gonna dig it up anyway. There's, big pieces of machinery are gonna rip everything up, so maybe we don't even care
And I
about
think
that.
there's a goodwill factor down the road. Why is, when you're gonna want them here, you don't want them just at the block.
Agreed. So that's a great, 2 years from now at a board meeting, we'll talk about that, about what, hey, we're actually got the foundations on the other side, we're getting ready to move. What do we do with this situation of the individual hangar owners? It
Are
also
we
says,
required, when I'm sorry. When we move these hangars to the south side, are we required to have running water through the bottom of the hangars?
no, waterfront properties, they pay extra for it.
Oh, okay.
Another caveat is at any time, if you report, you can pack that port up and take it off, with 30 days notice. So not only can I say, hey, the lease is done, but if people wanted to move to another airport, they could take their hangar with them. For this discussion, the most pertinent, clause in the lease is the last one, the fourth one. And it basically says that the county may, in connection with future development of the airport, require the premises for permanent buildings and development, and in such case, the lessee shall, it's very important when it says shall, within 30 days from receiving written notice from the airport director, remove said hangar to another location at said airport as designated in writing by the airport director. The final clause is really the most important, where it says the cost of the removal and relocation shall be borne by the lessee. So when we get to that point 2 years from now, and we're looking at, we've got asphalt down, the tax pays in, we give them written notice, and then at their own expense, they can then hire somebody, or there's, the company that sold them actually sells like trailers to transport these hangars, but then they would then move them to their new location and be, you know, on the south side where they belong.
Paul, I have a question. Are porta ports, and this is just information for me, are they valuable enough or standard enough that it's a given that we would have those at an airport? I mean, does every airport have them? I've seen them in some places, but I haven't seen them in every place. Would there be any thought of, with the development on the south side, that we don't have porta ports anymore? Or we have more porta ports because it's advantageous to have them versus not having them? Is there a compelling case to do one thing or another?
That's a really good question. I've seen them at airports across the country, and I've seen them not in some. I think the value is there because I think we're selling them. The last one sold for like 180 grand on a month-to-month lease that I can cancel that, you know, so that's a pretty significant value. So I do think that the vast majority of the port-to-port hangars, and again, I don't want to speak for, you know, hangar owners, but I just, when you kind of to think about that kind of money, and then you're only paying, you know, 49 cents, I think the vast majority, and I use the word attempt, to, if they attempt, a lot of those hangars have been sitting there for 30 years and actually have settled 6 or 8 inches into the asphalt. So if you ever drive around them, you actually have a hitch on the front that, you know, that you would hook up to the back of your Volkswagen. Those are into the ground. So I'm not sure when you actually get into the engineering of tearing it down, putting it on a trailer and re-establishing, if at that point the value would be there. Again, I'm not an engineer, I don't know enough about it, but I think if it's a fairly simple operation, just because of the value of what those hangars are bringing now. When I first got here, they were going for like 40 grand. And then just, you know, kept leapfrogging up. So I think there is a definitely value where those owners would move them. I mean, it could be, again, the interesting thing is we need at a minimum to guarantee spots for 61. The T hangars, I think, again, we should have those space, but we don't have to. We could just say we're tearing them down and we're gonna replace them with, you know, corporate hangars or whatever. And that's as we move forward over the next 5 months now. Cause I gave you guys 6 months to get your jobs done. To kind of say, hey, here's how we think laying out the south side would look like.
Well, what's the demand? Do we have more demand for T hangers or more demand for?
I would say the demand is equal. There are none for sale that last more than about 30 days. And as you can see, the price just keeps going through the roof. And we have 6-year waiting list to get into the T hangars. And so literally when one empties out, we start going through, and people on the list, they're like, oh, that was 5 years ago and I've moved, or, you know, I had a plane, but I had to move it to Erie and I'm just so happy to stay there. So we do go through 6 or 8 names, maybe 10 names at the most before the guy's like, oh my God, thank God, I'm ready. And then he takes in the T hangar. So, the demand here is astronomical and will continue to be so as long as all the indicators, you know, remain the way they are.
You know, I would think that in the future, I'm sorry. Yeah. In the future, if we move these hangars, the plot we put them on should be large enough that we could build a regular T hangar in the future on that spot when we finally get rid of these. Otherwise, don't make them too small.
I'm not following what you're saying.
So he's saying if you were to bring over a T hang or a porta-port and it's say 40 feet wide, put it on a 55-foot wide lot so that that eventually if the T hangers rust away, fall away, people don't want them, then you could take them away and replace it with a T hanger. Is that kind of your synopsis, Ryan? Randy?
Exactly. Exactly.
Somebody have a question back there?
I'm just gonna add, for what it's worth, the business plan, the layout that you had shown up there at the the hangar development on the south side, those are actually all T hangars. So we assumed that ultimately they would be full T hangar units. So if you were to bring the porta ports over there, we follow that design, it would be a little bit smaller, but we have scaled it and sized it such that you would have that.
Okay, great.
That's what, yes.
They kind of touched on what I was gonna say, because you're gonna be confident of those people that have 8 inches sunk in the concrete.
Okay, next slide. So the other, I think, must-have on the south side, and we touched on this last month, is a fuel farm. We believe we need an FBO on the south side, only because if you kind of look at our airport, we have roughly 190 to 200 acres on the north side. We have 2 FBOs. We're gonna have pretty much 200 acres on the south side. And, how long does it take a truck to get over to Palace? About 45 minutes?
To get over there?
Yeah.
Oh, no, turnaround time for completion is probably about 35 minutes on average up to Virginia. So I can get to Pilatus and back in about 35 minutes time. It's
Okay.
long for us.
It's driving far faster than I am. The other issue is with a whole other airport on the south side without an FBO, they're gonna need more trucks because those trucks are going. Now and it's one lane at some different spots. And so if you had one signature truck coming back and one, now it's backing in and stuff. So, and the road's really not designed to carry those heavy fuel trucks that
Right.
often. So,
Is there potential for having an access road, the other side of the airport? Is that just kind of like, I know the grading would be a pretty challenge.
you mean going the other way around? So there's 2 spots that are really steep.
Yeah.
2 spots that like right off, those are the spots that I beat Ben in a bike race up.
Is that what they call it?
Yes, yeah. Now, I was on an e-bike and he was on a regular bike. So, I'll never say never. I mean, I throw it to by the way, these are Aviation Wolpert engineers that are here.
That would take a significant improvement to get that first hill off the perimeter. I mean, it's steep.
So,
Unlikely.
unlikely, yeah, never say never, but unlikely.
Okay.
So we need to locate a fuel farm on that side to be able to support an FBO. For an FBO, we need a minimum of 15 acres. And then per the minimum standards, there's staffing, hangar space, office space, things like that. As right there, Airport Perimeter Road is marginally suited for fuel trucks. Our north side fuel farm is about 2.5 acres. So kind of in our planning, we probably need to set aside about 3 acres, kind of block that off and say, that's where our fuel farm is gonna go. Make sure it flows correctly with the future development. But if we develop out and all of a sudden we're like, oh, we kind of forgot about the fuel farm, now our FBOs are struggling. I will tell the FBOs here that, I think another future conversation will be either adding a full 3rd FBO or possibly like an annex, so that it wouldn't require the full 15 acres, like, on the north side. We could sort of scale it to the south side. That would make it a little bit, equal for participating FBOs already. So we wouldn't allow, obviously, a 3rd FBO to come in and kind of cheat the system, but, that'll be a discussion we have a year from now or whatever, and say, are you guys even interested? And if you are, how do we make that a fair decision? So, so with that, next slide. So this was, during our strategic business plan, we came up with 5 possible locations for the, fuel farm. And number 1 was if we were gonna build a commercial terminal. If you remember those discussions from 2 years ago, we thought we were gonna put a commercial terminal over there. That now is leased, so we can't put it there. 2, 3, and 4 are still viable. And then 5 is not viable because Pilatus has a right of first refusal on that parcel. And that would be pretty much prime hangar development, whether it's Pilatus or somebody else, to be able to put a fuel farm right there next to our main taxiway. So, looking at those couple spots, I'm gonna have actually kick this over to the engineers. Any thoughts on the three of those? Do you have a favorite? Do you hate one?
I mean, my opinion is simply to have it in close proximity to the folks that are gonna be using the post. So if the FBO is gonna be up over on the ramp area close to the runway, more than likely that would be the problem. Them, and that's big. So that's gonna be a.
Right.
You can control it better, you have better access. Just makes the most sense.
Okay, I guess my one question would be, I like spot 2. No, yeah, so spot 2 is actually fairly level. I think that's actually, I think when we were having our discussions, we liked that one a lot. It was spot 3 that's kind of in a hole. So it's down there right kind of by the tower, and then you've got, trucks going up in the winter and kind of some grading stuff, so.
Can't develop on it, but I was wondering if you could
Can't
actually.
develop, so that's me, I'm always like maximize, screw the fuel trucks, make them wear chains. So again, I think, at this point, we're kind of looking at it going, okay, what do we think? Are there some considerations like, okay, who need, where should it be closest to the FBOs? Are there any other considerations that you all can think of that we need to kind of go, well, have you thought about this, access from street side so that the, fuel providers from Texas or wherever they're coming from can get in and fill those tanks up.
I like 2, because I think 4 can actually continue expansion down and development.
Yes.
2 looks like it's a dead zone.
Yep.
I think I kind of agree with that because like Jensen said, you do something on 4, you lock your, you're done.
Yep.
Yeah. Is this current Sims right across where it says draft? Is that Sims right there
Yes, current Sims is there.
currently?
Where at?
Yeah,
Bottom right,
bottom right
Oh.
corner going up.
I see.
Bill, that's something.
I was just thinking if you're bringing the fuel farm closest to an access road or at least to the public road fenced in, you obviously would have to plan for, hey, we can't signature or shelter, whoever can get to that truck right away. A lot of space like they do now. I don't know, proximity of that road affected.
Certainly a viable spot. Number 2, again, safety, security, access, flows. There's some refinements that can be made. I'm certainly to this plan. I know this is an older plan as well, so as things move along, I think as long as we're hitting all those marks that you've identified, it's probably somewhere in that area.
I think that's the last slide.
Other than names
Names.
or the different.
Oh, actually, before we get to the subcommittees, I would like to turn, so this is, Matt, Jim, and Colin from Javiation Wolpert. And if we could do, I kind of skipped over at the beginning, but I wanted to get through my slides and then come back to you guys. Talk about 3, 2, 1, sort of your thoughts, progress, any sort of gotchas or, oh, by the ways.
Yeah, no problem. No gotchas yet. I think that we're moving, what we had described or what we had talked about a few months ago when we presented the board. We're looking at really 3, primary options, which was the, reconstruction of the runway, as it's currently, constituted and the implications associated with that. A reduced runway based on, the current fleet mix and the use of the runway and what some of the costs of that might be associated with. Some of the other challenges we have with respect to the regulatory requirements, as well as the runway continues to deteriorate, is there going to be a delta between the point where the runway becomes unusable and when we could actually reconstruct it? There's a big factor there that we would need to look into, because once you close the runway, it's not so easy to reopen it, even if you reconstruct it appropriately, because there are some design criteria that the doesn't ascribe to, that if you were to do it now, the FAA might grandfather us on, But if we were to close it and try to reopen it, they might not give us that flexibility. So those were the first two options, which are how to maintain the runway. And the third was if decision was made that the runway could not be maintained over the long term, what might you be able to do with that area? What opportunities that might that present to the airport? You know, that'd be development, that for commercial service, for more hangar space, for other business development and the like. So to provide the board with a full range of the options and the implications of each one of those so that you all can make an educated decision. And we're on schedule for delivery to you guys.
Excellent. Super. Any questions for Jim and the team? All right, now you know your the name slide that I never saw.
This is who has emailed me.
Hey, you guys axed me up. I got fired.
Did you respond?
Oh. I did get fired myself.
By the way,
You'd be wrong.
Thought I left mine open for you, slot where you could.
So the question is, if the board was to form subcommittees and flesh out these two different, areas of research and thought, who would want to participate on each and that sort of thing.
Can add me to Tony's.
They put me anywhere.
That's why Phil's there. He was the put me anywhere crowd.
So here's what I'd like to discuss, kind of the thing. We, I think at the last month's meeting, had maybe 5 different categories to go over. And then the board kind of said, well, these are very similar and kind of working. The issue becomes state law when it comes to public meetings. We got clarification yesterday from our attorney. If we have 3 members of a board, then it has to be a public meeting and it has to be messaged and all that stuff. So we could do that, like, there's no issue having a public meeting other than just Ben has to send out the agenda and then take minutes and more work for Ben, which I'm totally fine with.
Yeah.
Or we could kind of go back and kind of break them out a little bit to keep the teams at 2. Because the reality is, the way I see this working is a team or a subcommittee, whatever we want to call it, comes in and works with the staff. So it'll be Ben, myself, Brian, whoever else, possibly Javiation. And then we can kind of really do working groups and get more accomplished than if we were like, oh, we got to notice this, we've got to give 5 days heads up and stuff. And then we have sort of a public meeting. You're just not getting the sort of the groundwork done that I think we need. So again, up to you guys if we want to talk about how that would break out to keep those teams at 2, or if you think the public meetings is the right way to go.
Keep it groups of 2.
Great.
We have to get it to somewhere before we should include comment from the public, obviously. But it's just too impossible, it's too sidetracked without getting it somewhere down the road.
Yeah, there's a lot of groundwork in the next 4 months before we're ready to even come to the full board and kind of get those comments and incorporate that and then, go on from there. So I'm gonna let Jansen sort of lead the discussion on how we want to develop or break those apart. Do you have last month's slides maybe and kind of
Let me see if those are,
see if that's any easier to,
this is kind of, the more broken out version.
So I think everyone in here has committed to one. Throw me down there with Phil, slot me where you need to slot me. Is there another one that anyone in the group would like to sit on? And I really like the idea of bringing in some of our tenants, some of our surrounding organizations to be part of those conversations.
Well, in the groups of 2 that you currently have up there, they're kind of under big topics, right? You have to break some topics off. Do we know what they want? The 2 in each of those groups, if you go back to,
Well,
sorry.
they-
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that, like, do we know, for example, if John and Randy really want market feasibility or financial or, I don't
it's not here, so we just put them where we need it.
know.
Randy, do you have a preference?
No, the financial side or that'd be a good thing to work on.
So go back to your 5.
Yeah.
Is there anything in there that you don't want to be on specifically? Because then we can let Ben and Paul go back and put us where they want. I mean, is there anything that you really just don't want to sit on?
Fine with all of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think let you slot us, we've heard a decision, we're gonna do 2 per, and we will let you slot all of us where you want to put us. There's 8 of us, so there's 5 of those. I don't know if you're gonna combine one of those.
Yeah, we could.
I'd kind of look at like type, scale and timing, maybe with construction.
And then you're getting 2, 2, 2, 2.
You know, 2, 4 groups of 2.
If you're thinking of another one, I would kind of like to be on the lease rate return on.
Okay. So just for me, we're throwing that previous slide out where we had a few names because it just didn't really work for the,
Oh, well, in construction too.
okay.
And your flashlight is on. I don't know if you know that.
I did not.
And if we need to fine tune with those committees, but what I'm generally hearing is 2 per, and there's pretty open-ended willingness to serve where we feel like. So
Yeah.
The airport can put you guys to work as needed, it sounds.
that's what I'm.
Yeah, the bad storm, they.
Unless the fair work bill passes. then you gotta-
That's right, then they can't without 2 weeks' notice.
All right, any other comments? Anyone in the audience?
Actually, Jansen, I do have one thing. I serve on the Airport Noise Roundtable, and as one of my, I said, when I got appointed here, I'd be happy to kind of try to cross-pollinate those things, so bring that to you. So I just give you guys a quick update on that. The Noise Roundtable has looked at proposals from a couple of different consultant groups to consult with that group on facilitating both the meetings and potentially a VFR approach and departure plan. And no decision has been made yet. There's more information from one of the proposed contractors, and that'll be looked at as we go forward. Beyond that, if anybody ever has questions about that, please let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for serving on that.
I will not be there on Monday, but it's the FAA one, so
Yeah,
I'll watch the tape when I get back.
fine. It's fairly painful to serve on. It's not, this is the big way better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Last call? All right, motion to adjourn.
Oh, okay.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5:39. I thought we could do quick.
Way to go, Jim.
Yes, right.
Yeah, Bill's out, Jansen's in.
Make a motion that he runs.
Seconded.
Poor Bill.
Okay, thank you, guys.